Hello, Simone. So in this video, we are going to be talking about one, how we are seeing a radical change in German politics with the right and the quote unquote far right winning extremely large amounts compared to previous election cycles. And we're going to be discussing how the entrenched bureaucrats in German deep state is preventing them from even being able to vote within their own Congress, despite being the second largest party in the country now. And the largest party being a conservative party as well, and the conservative party betraying them.
Okay.
Sort of start with a map here to give you an idea. This first map you're seeing here, you see almost all red right here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the SPD, okay? So that's like a left-leaning party. The gray is one of the conservative parties, and the blue, the little blue you see here, is the AFD, the one that all the other parties are afraid of. They literally mark their members as domestic terrorists and are constantly surveying them, and we will go over this as well.
Okay.
This is this election cycle. The next one, all
Oh.
blue or gray. Just conservative across the board. It's like that Reagan election.
Yeah.
One little, like even Berlin is half gray, with the other part being the littlest holdout of the still red.
Wow.
Is that not
Okay.
absolutely insane? And so now you might be hearing all this and being like, well, I mean, of course the AFD must be like extremist, rightist, you know, whatevers, right? So let me
Right.
tell you about the person who runs the AFD. Because I don't even think you know this, Simone.
Yeah, no, my coming into this with only having seen references to the AFD in headlines would be, I mean, I'm assuming it's not accurate because it would be crazy if this were the case, but they're basically saying that the AFD is, you know, the small square mustache people, that they're just that
Okay,
party
so
again.
the person who runs the AFD is Alice Weedle.
Okay.
She's a 46-year-old lesbian. She's
Oh.
in a same-sex relationship with a Sri Lankan. They have 2 sons together.
Oh.
So she is in a interracial gay relationship with 2 kids. She has a doctorate in economics, is fluent in Mandarin, and formerly worked for Goldman Sachs and the Bank of China.
She sounds super cool. She sounds like someone I want to be friends with. I like
Right?
this.
Doesn't she? And she splits her time for this ultra German nationalist between living in Berlin and Switzerland. But she
Okay.
is known for increasingly radical positions, such as advocating for mass deportations in terms like remigration, which you kind of need in Germany at this point if you want there to be any hope for a future of a German state.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that later. But by this, what I mean is if you look at current immigrant birth rates versus native German birth rates and current immigrant ingoing rates, if you plan on there being a Germany, and you can
Yeah.
look at the rate at which they integrate into German society, right?
Yeah.
Based on, you know, different countries. There will not be anything like what we think of as Germany today with German values. And I'm not talking about Western values. I'm talking about like anything other than like really Sharia law.
What happened to a gay couple in Gaza?
Executed according to Islamic law. Islam doesn't endorse gayism. Islam doesn't endorse homosexuality. Just like Canada doesn't endorse a lot of things.
So would you like to see Sharia law in Canada replace Canadian law?
At some point it will. You know, because we have families, we are making babies. Your population is going down the slump, right? And by 2060, according to Pew Research Institute, your research, by 2060, Muslims will be the biggest religious group the world over. What are you going to do then? Actually, to oppose Sharia is even then. One day we can have a Muslim majority nation here in Canada, right in your face.
Yeah.
Like we're not, like if you are a lesbian, you should be afraid of this, for example.
Yeah, she seems like the kind of person who would be uniquely interested in an intervention. I mean, when I read the book Pray, for example, by Ayan Hirsi Ali, she talks about the extent to which many, especially vulnerable people, old people, women, young girls, are victimized by primarily Muslim migrants in
But
Europe.
the point I'm making is that anybody who runs the math knows in 50 to 100 years, Germany doesn't exist anymore. And any set of values that they claim to be doing all this on the behalf of won't exist in the future. And you can just run the math. Like, it's that simple. They just don't care. They care more about looking like the good guys right now than the long term. But so, okay, you get an idea of who she is. So what does the party stand for before we go further, when we get into this particular election cycle?
Yes.
They are anti-immigrant. The party advocates for negative immigration and removing the constitutional right of foreigners to seek asylum. I love it. They're like removing their constitutional right to force themselves on our country.
Well, but that's kind of what happened, right? I mean, at this one point with the Syrian war, you had Angela Merkel saying, yes, if you are a refugee, you can basically come here. So yeah, I mean, like they really do have to reverse something that was a very foundational policy for a long time that completely and permanently changed.
But I love the way the AI words it. Their constitutional right to seek asylum. That's like me saying, the government took away my constitutional right to demand sex from my wife. It's like, well, that constitutional right removed rights from other people. So you see, it's a problem, right?
A little bit.
So what else? What were there other policies here? They were anti-Islam. The AFD states Islam does not belong to Germany. Does not belong in Germany, but does not belong to Germany, and seeks to restrict its influence.
They're anti-caliphate. They're not like anti-religious freedom. Okay.
They have Euroscepticism. They oppose many EU policies, as they should. When we see that the EU is basically like US aid of Europe. Climate change denial. They deny human-caused global warming. Not going to speak on that because that could get the video restricted. And they have a pro-Russia stance. They have criticized sanctions against Russia and Germany's support for the Ukraine. So very much sort of mainstream MAGA-like party. And so,
well, yeah, no wonder then JD Vance was speaking with them. Elon Musk has spoken with them. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, and so I was trying to like look up because they were like, oh no, they actually are like Nazis. They actually are like anti-Semitic when I was trying to, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to bet that they support Israel despite being called Nazis and that all of these German leftist parties right now are anti-Israel.
No.
Can I just check? Yeah, but there has been a recent split within the party. Historically, the party was sort of uniformly pro-Israel. And now, as proof of their Nazism, quote unquote, some members like co-chair Tiana Tripula have criticized Germany's weapon exports to Israel and called for de-escalation. While other members of the party disagreed with this stance and called it, quote, left-wing pacifist nonsense. This sounds like this party knows how to fuck.
These are the ones that have the good parties.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, I'm trying to find like, what is all this horrible stuff they're doing, right? They must be doing something horrible. So in November 2023, a secret meeting took place near Potsdam, Germany, involving members of the AFD party and other far-right groups. This meeting has since become a major political scandal in Germany. The details include, there is this, apparently they call them neo-Nazi activists, whatever that means, and members of the identitarian movement and some even centrist people. Okay, it just sounds like anyone who wanted to come could come. Very similar to like some events we've been at. Okay. Purpose, the meeting's primary focus was on a quote-unquote master plan for mass deportations. They termed remigration. Okay, mass deportations are necessary if Germany is to survive right now. Anyone who runs the mass knows that. Targets, the plan aimed to deport not only foreigners and asylum seekers, but also quote-unquote non-assimilated German citizens with migrant backgrounds. That seems perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, if you don't want to play by Germany's games, get out of Germany.
Yeah, if you're going
by Germany's rules. Yeah.
For example, if you're going to treat women as property, if you're going to not give your daughters a choice in who they marry, if you're going to, because once you get in enclaves that's big enough to do that, it doesn't matter what the country's rules are, right?
Totally, yeah.
If you're going to threaten your kids' lives, if they're gay, if you're going to, like, yeah.
Well, it undermines the sovereignty of whatever state in which this is happening. If people will just blatantly disregard your own freedoms, protected freedoms, and laws, then yeah, you should, like, either the country needs to get rid of those people fast, or it has to admit the fact that they're going to lose their sovereignty, period.
Yeah. And so how is this party that won, as you saw in this last cycle, how are they going to be kept out of power? All right.
Okay.
So what Germans have done, and keep in mind, 85% of people voted in this last election cycle, which was the
Wow.
highest number since I think the like reconstitution of Germany after
Yeah, that's
the two sides combined.
high. Isn't it normally for a nation, like if we're lucky, 50%, maybe more like 40?
Yeah. Yeah, well, in Germany, I don't remember, but this
Let's
is
see what.
really high.
What?
It was the highest since Germany's reunification in 1990.
Wow, yeah. So in the 2024 US presidential election, approximately 63.9% of voting eligible people voted. So this is like way, way higher. This is meaningful. That's huge.
So how are they being kept out of power? Germans created something they call the Firewall. And we're going to go through all of the political parties at play here, how they lost power. But basically, the leftists got the mainstream conservative party, the CDU, to agree to never form a coalition with the ADU and to not count their votes in, like, basically not allow them to vote on things.
So just freeze them out. Just
yes, they have not been able
it doesn't
to
matter
vote.
how many votes they got. It doesn't matter what citizens of Germany say. I mean,
No, it doesn't. This is a literal, like, to an American, Germany looks like a state that has been captured by a group of fascists.
that is
They have
terrifying.
placed mainstream party members with reasonable, I'd even say the most reasonable opinion on things, under constant surveillance by the state. They have made ideas illegal. They have made families like ours illegal in the interest of German genetic purity because we use
Oh, did you
genetics.
know that it's also illegal to insult someone in Germany?
Yes, yeah, they have made it illegal to insult themselves. Now, keep in mind, they insult
Like
this other
literally
party.
people have been arrested. There's actually been a string of arrests in Germany
But
where
they can insult to this party because they do it all the time in the stuff I'm reading. So
then
clearly
they get
that's
away
not a
with it.
problem.
Yeah, no, but like literally, even if you repost a political cartoon, for example, that's considered insulting. One example being, for example, migrants. Oh, sorry. One example being a political cartoon with an illustration of an electrical plant saying jungle gym for migrants that someone, I think, just reposted and they were arrested for that. I think the fine for your first insult, because I think that the situation escalates depending on how many times you've done this, is 5,000 euros, which is a lot of money. And then it can be higher depending on various circumstances. And it is not considered any less big to insult someone online. In fact, it's considered even worse because it's
So
more
they have
permanent.
taken power. The citizens don't want them in power anymore. They have frozen out the second largest party in the country. They've put them under surveillance, and they have yet to understand that they are literally playing the Nazi playbook right here. They march in the street against the Jews in Israel right now. Well, I've seen leftist German marches on this. They, river to the sea, talk about murdering the Jews. They don't see that they're the bad guys. I love that they still call the pro-Jewish guys the Nazis, the guys who didn't forcibly take power in a coup. But what they do is they form these coalition governments. And I'll put on screen here the ways that they might come together. So the middle left and the middle right might come together to form a coalition, or you might be able to get a near coalition of the middle right and the Greens, which are a far left group. But yeah. All right, so let's go over the various parties right now. So the mid-right, okay, in the last election cycle, they won 24%, and this one they won 28.5% to 29%.
Okay.
So they grew, but like not as much as the AFD. But that's a lot given how much the AFD grew. And this is the Christian Democratic Union or the Christian Social Union. Now, their key issues are, and this is the group that, despite being the key group in power, refuses to allow the AFD to vote or partner with them, economic revitalization through tax cuts and deregulation, stricter immigration practices, maintaining the debt brake, exploring nuclear options, strengthening NATO, and supporting Ukraine. Why? This is like the most cucked rhino-ness of...
It's like, let's give away everything and put German citizens last. I didn't hear anything about increasing the quality of life for Germans.
Well, no, they want stricter immigration policies. They want, like, this party claims to want that stuff, but they won't work with the other guys who want this stuff because they're too spicy. These guys are very much like ARC. We went to this I went to this conference in the UK where they basically was crazy because in the crowd, you have people like me where they could have had me talk about pronatalism. No, they had Steve Shaw, who like no one is. I like Steve Shaw, but he's like doesn't have the audience we have. He doesn't have the prominence we have, but he's way less spicy and basically a lefty. They'd have like Curtis Yarvin in the audience, and they'd put on some like nobody on stage who I'd never heard of. They had people on stage like hand wringing about Trump, and this was supposed to be like a pan-European like conservative conference, but the European conservative power players are so in the last generation that they can't see that things have changed and that they get edified by working with groups like the AFD, as we saw JD Vance do when he went to Munich, the carpet bombing of Munich, when he went through and carpet bombed them with truth bombs. It's a recent speech he gave. We didn't get a chance to go over it because I was at this conference, so I wasn't able to, stay up to date with our videos. That's why they were all evergreen content recently. But anyway, the carpet bombing of Munich, he went and he talked with the AFD and none of the other parties because the US is trying to normalize this. Now let's talk about the AFD. I mentioned them. They went from 10% in the last election cycle to 20.5% in this election cycle. So, more than doubled. And then you have I love their anti-immigration, closer ties with Russia, opposing military aid to Ukraine, alternate economic approaches, including sanctions on Russia, lifting sanctions on Russia. So basically just the way that MAGA is different from like old crunchy neocons and stuff like that. The Social Democratic Party, the SPD, this party went from 26% to 15%, completely crashed. This was the one that used to have that huge public support. They wanted targeting public investment and social spending, more moderate stance on immigration, reforming the debt brake, and continued support for Ukraine. Then you have the Green Party. This is 12 to 13% in this cycle, 14.7% in the last cycle. So just lost a little bit of support. Mm-hmm. Climate action and renewable energy expansion, reforming the debt brake for future investments, basically taking off the spending money without limit. That's what these guys all want. Rejecting nuclear energy and supporting Ukraine. Then you have the Free Democratic Party, the FDP, which is now at 4%. So they don't get any seats. They used to be at 11.7%. If you're below 5%, you don't get any seats.
Wow.
They want economic liberalization, stricter immigration policies, and maintaining the debt brake. They're basically libertarians, it looks like. And then you have the Left Party, which was at less than 5% in the last cycle and 19.9% in Berlin this cycle. So nearly double from the last election. And they're just social welfare nonsense. I'd also note that the AFD outperformed among younger demographics, which is obviously really terrifying to the existing power structure. But I think there isn't much they could do. They have to basically pull off something that's impossible within German politics right now to gain power. So we'll talk a bit more about the firewall and where it's breaking, but any thoughts you had?
I'm so glad this happened because I thought it was impossible. I thought that this was just a nation in inevitable decline. And I think that you did too. You were basically like Germany has dug its own
right
grave.
now it's still in inevitable decline unless the center-right party breaks the firewall.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Trump could do that.
Really?
Yes. If Trump and Vance basically call out Germany for what it's become, which is a non-democratic fascist state, they cannot ignore the will of the people. They can't just call off, as JD Vance says, you can't just call off elections when you lose.
Yeah.
And that's what the left and the bureaucratic class in Europe, the bureaucratic oligarchs in Europe have taken to doing. And that I think saying you are not a friendly country right now, you are a failed democracy right now, and we can't normalize relations with Germany until Germany respects the will of the voters. So let's talk about how the firewall works. Exclusion from coalitions. Other parties have pledged not to form coalitions with the AFD, effectively shutting them out of government formation. Legislative isolation. Major parties avoid collaborating with the AFD on passing legislation. Institutional security. The AFD is under surveillance by Germany's domestic intelligence for alleged right-wing extremism.
Oof. It's interesting how this is such an extreme case of using name calling to just completely disenfranchise an entire group, and completely false name calling as far as I'm aware. I've sometimes heard it de-escalated, their description or association with the baddies de-escalated to has some loose ties with known baddies. But again, I don't even know how true that is, because every time someone is called that online, they aren't. They're just in some other ways an apostate
Well,
to like urban
I tried to
monoculture.
look to find like genuinely bad things they had done, and I couldn't find anything. It'll be things like saying Muslims are not, or like Islam is not German, right? For example, or German culture, or some Muslims do not appear to be integrating into our society, or grape cases are disproportionately Muslim right now, or like these are all just like reasonable and obvious truths that go against the grain to say.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at the fight that they've had with this, because I actually met somebody at this conference who was talking to me, fan of the show, who's under surveillance by the government.
Gosh.
And he's like a leader of one of these parties. And he's like, look, I've even gone to the government and been like, hey, because they have him on the list that requires like constant monitoring to see if he's a terrorist. And they go, can't you just like do the research on me, actually investigate me to find out if I actually am a terrorist or not?
Like, just do it already.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they're like, no, we can't. We're stretched too thin, which basically allows them to put anyone they want to on this list, which automatically overstretches the list. Instead of looking at the actual terrorists, like the one who drove a van into people at Christmas and killed 6 people, like they don't care about this. Okay, so the classification as a suspected case in 2021, the BFB classified the AFD as a suspected case of extremism. This designation allows the agency to monitor the party's activities more closely. Legal basis: a German court ruled in May 2024 that this surveillance is lawful, rejecting the appeal of the AFD. The court found, quote unquote, sufficient evidence to justify classifying the party as a potential threat to democracy. Scope of the surveillance: this classification enables the BFB to use intelligence methods such as wiretaps, recruiting informants, and monitoring suspicious activities of party branches. Reasons for the surveillance: the court cited evidence that the AFD may pursue goals that contradict human dignity in certain groups. So I love this ongoing process that the BFV continues to gather information and prepare reports of the AFD's activities. This surveillance is part of Germany's effort to protect its democratic constitution from extremist threats. That is wild. Now, here is where we get a little bit of potential break in this, okay?
Okay.
On January
Some hope.
29th.
This is dire, Malcolm.
It is dire. MPs from the far-right Alternative for Germany, the AFD, clustered around 46-year-old party leader Alice Weidel in parliament taking selfies. Weidel, dressed in a white roll neck and navy blazer, gave a reticent but pleased-looking smile at the camera. Moments earlier, AFD had made history. For the first time since entering the federal parliament in 2017, its votes had influenced national policy. The motion to restrict immigration was non-binding. What mattered was that the entire center-right opposition, the CDU, which brought it forward, and the Libertarian Free Democratic Party, FDP, who supported it, relied on additional AFD votes to pass it. So they basically used AFD votes to pass a non-binding resolution. In so doing, CDU leader Friedrich Merz, who's the next guy to be prime minister, abolished a post-war consensus among mainstream parties to ostracize the extreme and far right. They are not that extreme. They're probably to the left of Trump. Merz was avoiding eye contact of the ruling Social Democratic Party, SDP, who was furious. The AFD was over the moon, standing on chairs, embracing each other. Stung by criticism that they were making common cause with the far right, a dozen CDU MPs refused to back their party leader a second time. He still won, though. Weidel was incensed. Merz does not have what it takes to be chancellor, she told reporters. The conservatives aren't united. Last month, the collaboration at the federal level didn't seem to affect CDU's standing in the polls, suggesting not all Germans are as affronted by the inclusion of the AFD in decision-making as the Berlin political elite. And that is what it is. You can see this is just the elite, because after this, they still had that huge win. Here, I would note what I actually love is the way that the leader of the AFD dresses. What is it? Turtleneck with the blazer reminds me of the way that far leftist lesbian dresses. Ellen DeGeneres was born in Germany and became MAGA.
Mirror World Ellen DeGeneres.
Leader of MAGA. Yeah, Mirror World Ellen DeGeneres. It really is like a Sliders episode or something where you enter a different world and you're like, wait, is that fucking Ellen DeGeneres running MAGA in this country?
Oh boy. She seems super awesome. I'm all for
Not Ellen DeGeneres, you mean this lady.
this lady. Yeah.
Ellen DeGeneres is the worst.
She is the worst. She is the worst person in the world. Huge skank, terrible.
What I don't understand is how anyone would become a leader within the AFD or try when it has been so clearly shadow banned, or not even shadow banned, just banned from the public discourse.
A few things. One, I want to remember here to put the scene of the Muslim who's yelling about what they're going to do when they take power in Canada in earlier in this episode.
Okay, yikes.
He had an episode around it. Remember, he's like, you know, when we're
Oh, him. Yeah, no, the guy who just very matter-of-factly. Yes. Oh gosh, yes.
Yes. So
You can't help but like the guy.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I think that one, keep in mind, like Vance met with them and not the other parties, just completely ignoring the firewall.
Yeah.
The only way Germany gets any sort of sanity again is breaking the firewall. And until they do that, they are a country that is in rebellion against its people. It is a Berlin elite that is in rebellion against its people while in the process of systemically eliminating them. I think it was something like in the last 10 years, like the number of immigrants had more than doubled. So as of 2022, 24.3% of Germany's population had a history of immigration. This includes people who have immigrated to Germany since 1950, who were the direct descendant of immigrants. So around 1 in 4 German citizens is non-German. And if you look at first generation immigrants, you're looking at 17.3%, so over 1 in 6. Like that is, when you look at the differential birth rates in the United States, things like the Great Replacement theory, I just don't buy at all. Like with, you know, oh no, not the tradcast Hispanics. They'll never be. Meanwhile, over half of Hispanic males voted for Trump in the last election cycle. The left was like, oh, we maybe made a mistake with that. But this is very different. This is a group that is anti, like I am able to be more moderate on my views towards immigrants because I live in the United States. If I lived in Germany or the UK, I would not be able to be as moderated on my views about immigration, where I would need to say, one, we can't, because in these countries they can't treat all immigrants as if they are exactly the same, when a disproportionate amount of the terrorism, when a disproportionate amount of attacks, even democratically, on German values through creating these sort of Sharia enclaves and stuff like that, are coming from one specific cultural background, and often just one country. I was talking to one of my friends in the UK, really cool Indian conservative lady. She's like, you know, it's crazy. Like all of this, it's not coming from even just one religion. It's like, it's one sub-region of Pakistan. And if you were just able to say this one sub-region of Pakistan, you'd end like 95% of the cases of the really horrifying, whether it's the grooming gangs or whether it's the random attacks or whether it's but they can't talk like that. Like everyone must be exactly the same, except for Germans who, and another thing that AFD has gotten in trouble for is they're like historical revisionism. They have pride in their country. They have pride in its history. They're like, we need to stop doing this. I love they call them anti-Semitic, despite how pro-Israel they are, because they want to stop being as effasive with the Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is actually important. Like if you want to have pride in your people, Germany has done enough, I think, by most people's standards, in terms of the whole whipping themselves over the Holocaust. I would even guess to most Jews today, like even in Israel, when I like talk with like extremist Jews, I'm like laughing. Well, you know, you could just ship all the people from Gaza into Germany, and they'll like get this solemn look on their face, and because they know Germany would take them, and they're like, no, we really shouldn't. Like that would kill Germany, and they take it, and you know, we need to like cut them some. Like so, like even the like pro Jewish Jews I know are like, yeah, hey, no, Germany, you've done enough. Like stop it. Stop whipping yourself. Pull the knife out. Stop stabbing yourself. This is getting gruesome at this point. Okay. You are actually replacing your own people at this point. To show the hint. And I mean, that's an offensive thing to say, but like, what do you think, Simone? If you look at the numbers, they are replacing their own people, right? Like, am I missing?
No. It's just birth rates. Like, what are you going to do?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things. I love it. I was looking at this really funny because I was on air at British Tonight. I did the like big talk show that night when I was in the UK. And one of the stats I was looking at was the difference between native-born British and Muslim fertility rates, and it was actually fact checkers. So it was Channel 4 News, and they're like, no, Muslims won't replace native British people. You see, native British people may have a fertility rate of 1.8, and Muslims have a fertility rate of 3, but by 2030, native British people will have a fertility rate of 1.8, and Muslims will have a fertility rate of like 2.3 or something. Now, hold on. This was done in 2014.
Okay.
Just 2024. Okay, so just 10 years later, native British people weren't at 1.8 years. Still, they projected 1.8 for 2030.
Yeah,
They'd
but
already
aren't they
gone to
1.6 now?
1.4.
What, they're at 1.4 now?
1.44, yeah.
Oh, Lord.
And by the way,
Okay.
the latest I could find on the Muslim fertility rate in the UK, it is now at 8.3. So it felt like 1%. British one is tanking.
Okay.
And fundamentally, I just think when I talk to progressives on this, I'm like, so you agree to progressives, you agree that Muslims are different culturally. They're better culturally than us Europeans, right? They're better. But they have different practices. They have different practices around marriage. They have different practices around how they relate to things like sexuality and gender. And those differences are what make them unique and beautiful. And that it is not your plan to erase their cultural heritage, right? We can agree on this, okay? It's not your plan. Okay. So we both agree your plan isn't to erase their cultural heritage. What happens to the native population if you are importing these people in really high numbers and we don't plan to erase their culture? Like, what's the logical outcome of this if their fertility rates are dramatically higher? I don't understand. It's like, okay, well then maybe
I think it's a matter of not caring for the most part, right?
Well, right. And there's like, well, okay, the British will become a minority in Britain or in Germany or whatever, right? And then they're like, but when the Muslims are the majority, they will treat us with the magnanimity that we have treated them.
What happened to a gay couple in Gaza?
Executed according to Islamic law. Islam doesn't endorse gayism. Islam doesn't endorse homosexuality. Just like Canada doesn't endorse a lot of things.
So would you like to see Sharia law in Canada replace Canadian law?
At some point it will. Because we have families, we are making babies. You're not.
And I was like, what are you? Look at Muslim majority countries. Like we have an eye. We can see the countries where these people came from, how they treated local religious minority populations. They did not treat them well. And this hasn't been the case of Islam throughout all of history. This isn't a Muslim thing intrinsically. Muslims used to be, of all the religions, like nicest to the minority populations in their countries. So I'm not attacking Islam in saying this. I'm saying this modern iteration of Islam that you are bringing into your country, it acts this way. Okay? Not all Islam, but the specific version of it that you are growing within your country. And when you deconvert somebody from one of these groups, when you do acculturate them, they stop having kids at the same rate. So the more extreme version is the one that's going to replace things. Like, I guess this is like the type of thing that would be called like an extremist, but I feel like I'm just walking people through logic that we all agree on. They just don't do the second step. They're like, okay, Islam is a unique culture with unique views on things like marriage, same-sex relations, the way a religion should relate to its government, the way minority populations should be treated within a state. And we can look and see how the people are acting and what they're voting for in their own countries, so they know what's going to happen, right? Like, I feel like this isn't like extreme, right? Like, this is, I guess it's extreme because then it's then so what? Well, then so what? We need to heavily restrict immigration.
But there's no, because the focus is on now and on immediate suffering. There just is no long-term focus. And I think when I go back to my mindset of a very progressive person, it's just take care of everyone right now, stop their suffering, ... Everything's going to be great. It's going to be great. We'll bring over the migrants who are suffering where they are now, and we will take good care of them, and they will be so grateful and live thriving lives and be happy, and all of us will do great. And by the way, we need help with our population right now anyway, et cetera, et cetera. There is no thought of irrevocable
It really
damage to our
reminds me,
culture
like
or
the
anything
modern
like that.
progressives, I see why they get along so well with the neocons because their view towards immigrants is very similar to the neocons' view towards nation building, which is like, oh, we'll go into Afghanistan and Iraq and we will give them democracy and they will be so grateful about all that
Oh
democracy
yeah,
we
yeah,
gave
yeah, yeah,
them
yeah. You're
that
right.
they are going to just love us and treat us amazingly and then other people are like, bro, it's a completely different culture. Like this extremist Islamic culture is not, they don't want to be friends with you.
Mhm.
And the problem is that other than us going there and murdering people, they're shipping them over here and having them murder people at home, you know? Like it's wild. And then I guess with the neocons, like we sort of got to a point where do they understand now that you can't do that? Like different cultures are different. I guess they just became progressives. I mean, we saw Dick Cheney like, doing campaigning with Kamala Harris and stuff. One of the things that I heard said recently that really stuck with me, maybe Adam Gold was watching somebody was saying this or something along these lines, where they were just saying in history. Oh, I remember who it was. Yeah, this was the guy who runs Sargon of Akkad had a piece saying this.
Oh.
He's like, look, everybody knows now, like, because we can see the tide turning, whether it's this election cycle or what's going on in the United States,
Mhm.
that the far left message is over at this point. Like, they don't have the power to continue long term, right? And that they don't have the birth rate numbers, they're losing political power. They really only still control like the media and the heads of companies, and those are being disintermediated by AI and new media. So, like, who knows what happens from there? Anyway, so we can look at all of this. And by the way, if people want to hire us for starting a DEI remediation firm that we're going to be seeing if we can work with Heritage on, and we got DEIremediation.com. So anyway, they look at, you can look at all this being in retreat, and we can sort of get a picture of how this is all going to be recorded in history books now. And the far wokeists do not realize how crazy they're going to look in the eyes of history. Like they think they're on the right side of history, but they look like actual crazy people.
No, listen to me. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm not insane. I've come back to warn you.
Uh-huh.
Of what?
In my time, a genocide is happening!
Who's responsible?
J.K. Rowling! Look, I have proof!
What am I looking at here?
A tweet!
It says she doesn't like being called menstruator. I don't understand.
Ah! Shh! You can't talk like that! Gay teenagers are going to kill themselves! They're killing themselves! They're killing themselves! In 2024, J.K. Rowling becomes genocidal and makes transgender children kill themselves with her Twitter account!
Transgender children?
Like people will ever make kids trans.
Not if we don't do something about it! There's an entire movement of people. They're trying to stop 10-year-olds from going on puberty blockers so they can have easier sex changes when they're older. Can't you see it's genocide?
Wait, you think not sterilizing children is genocidal?
Come on, guys, we're just dunking on a mentally ill guy at this point.
Like Trump was doing a speech recently where he got in a fight with the governor of Maine and he scolded her because he's not going to give Maine federal dollars because she is keeping trans people in sports in her states, right? Like trans women beating up women in her state. And Trump said in his speech, like, don't tell them, like, let her keep doing this until the next election cycle. We need this, guys. He goes, keep it in this room. The left doesn't know that nobody likes this. He goes, this is a 90-10 issue. But he goes, I don't know who this 10% is.
Yeah, good point. I just there's such different filters through which the polarized sides on each side view reality that they're now irreconcilable. It's interesting how in the past there seemed to be more of a shared understanding of reality. There may be a certain amount of out of touchness between people of different communities, but broadly, people kind of understood things in a similar way, at least within a single culture. But that's not the case anymore.
Yeah. With the ADF, something interesting we're seeing, and I've pointed this out in the United States, is the mainstream far right is becoming very friendly to gays. You see this with the AFD. You see this with, Scott Presler, I've mentioned in the US. You see this with the people who are anti-gay on the right, like turning against Trump. We have a video against this. And this has been really, really interesting. But one thing that makes it more interesting in Germany is that the AFD is anti-gay marriage, actively anti-gay marriage. But I think what we have seen is a lot of normal gays being like, hey, if this is what winning gay marriage brought us, I prefer just like a general acceptance than this, being able to lead your parties but maybe not get married. Like, and I remember, talking to like one gay conservative, and they were like, the moment we went too far was the cake. And if you guys don't remember the cake thing, it was a cake shop was sued because they had a religious people running it who didn't want to do a gay wedding cake. And they sued the shop for discrimination. And I totally I agree with that. That was when the movement jumped the shark.
Well, that's when consent, and it was about imposing consent in a way that
imposing their values on somebody else, not
it curtailed someone else's private life and business in a way that revoked their consent. And
but the point I'm being is being anti-gay is not cool in conservative circles right now. And I think it's important to keep reminding people of this. You lose your AFDs if you go anti-gay. You lose your Scott Preslers if you go anti-gay.
Who's anti-gay? Who is anti-gay now? Like I really
so funny when I was at that ARC conference, for like the old school conservatives, it's these old sad conservatives. They're anti. I remember one I was talking about was like, well, there's not even real conservatives here. He's like, some people here don't want to ban gay marriage and like keep gays out of our events.
Wow.
And so
they're still alive, huh?
He wasn't just anti-gay. He also was anti-Trump and was mad that U.S. aid was being shut down.
What a delusional person! This is insane.
A classic, like he was from Eastern Europe, so he might have been like on the dole or something from U.S. aid or one of these things. I was like,
maybe
you're just like a classic slimy old.
But that's
bureaucrat.
a good. A lot of people claim to have unpopular opinions, and they just don't. That's an unpopular opinion.
But this opinion wasn't unpopular at this event. This event was just like the faction of the conservative party that we should consider the enemy of Trumpism, of the AFD, and that still control factions of things like the center-right party in Germany, where they try to use conservative values, but not have any improper ideas. But if they allow the left to set the stage of what improper ideas are, if they allow the left to like treat like terrorists mainstream conservative ideas, like, hey, we need to be selective with immigration in this country. These people really don't like us. How do you know they don't like us? Well, maybe the constant terror attacks.
I mean,
they do keep murdering us.
I bet, though, if we were talking with someone from that side, they'd be like, well, it was because we'd mistreated this person so terribly. They've faced so much hate and discrimination when entering our country. They deserve better. We haven't done well enough.
It's like they say they want to kill you before they go to your country. You can go to their countries. Okay? Anyway, love you to death, Simone. Any final thoughts?
Just that I love you. You're special and pretty.
So we've got to tell our followers about the Krampus assisted unaliving that
my God
threatened to pull on us.
Right. Well, for context, we decided to do Krampus as a Christmas tradition starting this year. So Malcolm got a very expensive Krampus costume, like a very realistic, terrifying mask of a horned goat man. He even got hooves for his legs, and then he borrows my giant black wool cloak, which is somewhere around here. Oh, and he has hands. He has prosthetic hands. And he scared the children, except for our son, Torsten. We actually have video footage of this. Torsten's just staring out the window while Malcolm's out there in a Krampus costume. And he's like, look, a monster. And everyone else is, well, I think our youngest daughter thought it was just Malcolm because it sounded exactly like Malcolm going rawr. And Octavian didn't really get it until Krampus somehow broke into our house and searched through their room briefly, or walked through the room looking for children to, beat and throw into a burlap sack and take away. And now he's sort of built Krampus into his lore of the world, meaning he occasionally talks with Torsten about how he's going to become a Krampus hunter. You know how like in vampire worlds, there's a calling of vampire hunter. And in his world, they're Krampus hunters. So he's like, well, I'm going to be a Krampus hunter. Also at night.
I haven't heard the Krampus hunter thing yet.
Oh yeah, that's a thing. That's a thing he's talked about. At night, he talks about locking up because he wants to make sure Krampus is not able to get inside. Well, yesterday when Malcolm was taking care of the kids, Malcolm was not giving Octavian a screen he was requesting because we only have very limited times for a screen. And Octavian, what did he say?
He said, okay, so he said something along the lines of like, I'm sad and I am angry and I am going to unlock all of the doors tonight so Krampus can get me and take me and I'll be dead.
Oh my God. Amazing. The new death by cop, by Krampus. So I gave him a lot of shame for that all night. I was like, Octavian, why would you say that? Krampus could probably tell you said that. Now Krampus is going to come for you. And he got real scared. So scared that he managed to bolt a whole new set of doors in our house, making it very difficult for Malcolm to read them bedtime stories at night, to go through a different set of doors. Because we sort of set up our house like a fortress. Anyway, fun times, huh?
Oh, in the land of sausages and beer, a tale of politics you'll hear. Bureaucrats with cunning grace, building coalitions all over the place. Parties unpopular, hand in hand, joined to thwart the people's demand. A firewall built with secret schemes to keep the AFD out of their dreams. Deep state coup, oh what a show. In Germany the plot did grow. Bureaucrats with crafty plans, keeping the power from voters' hands. The voters thought their voices loud, but bureaucrats hid behind a cloud. With meetings held behind closed doors, they stitched together a new report. The AFD left out in the cold, while coalitions took a hold. The people watched in disbelief as bureaucrats spun their mischief. Deep state coup, oh what a show. In Germany the plot did grow. Bureaucrats with crafty plans, keeping the power from voters' hands. Oh, the AFD left out in the cold, while coalitions took a hold. The people watched in disbelief as bureaucrats spun their mischief. Deep state coup, oh what a show. In Germany the plot did grow. Bureaucrats with crafty plans, keeping the power from voters' hands. So in this tale of power and might, bureaucrats ruled from out of sight. The voters' will they did restrain, leaving many to question the game.